Hello, and thank you for joining us for this week's Blockchain Gaming Roundup. It's Friday, 28th of November. I am Jenny Jordan, and with me is co-host John Jordan, in the mood today.
I've got a new shed. It's very exciting.
Good. Cold though, being in the shed in the winter.
Man needs a shed.
So let's kick off with talking about Ndus Interactive, South Korean developer, which its game Xociety announces raised $1.6 million this week, and it's also going into early access tomorrow, 29th of November. Yeah. So talk about Xociety. That's what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had I've quite a lot of time for them. I spent a bit of time with them back in the day when they're looking for funding, and they're quite a good team. As you often find with South Korean developers, they've sort of come through the big publishers out there, so NCSoft and Nexon. I mean, they're not a massive team, but they're a fairly substantial team. They were sort of incubated by Hashed, which is one of the stronger South Korean VCs. And they're building out this game, so you know how to say Xociety, Society with an X. And because they've got a lot of experience of just building games, it is a pretty solid sort of multiplayer shooter game. So it's PvE. So it has player versus player elements, shooting other players, and and also player versus environment. So and also players grouping up together to tackle bosses effectively in the environment. So that's the sort of games, those sort of games the South Koreans, just been making for like decades. So it's sort of, I think, a good basis for what they're trying to do. And then they've got this idea of a whole sort of society around it, which is sort of where the blockchain stuff comes in. And it's sort of fairly complicated. They've got some sort of factional stuff in there, like different, I think it's four or five different sort of corporations. And that's where some of the sort of the value stuff sort of sits. And I guess the interesting thing was they've ended up on Sui or Sui, which was a big deal for sort of Sui, because they were sort of pushing for games, and they've still got a few other ones, but Society is sort of their flagship game, and I think it's actually quite a good one to choose in the sense that it's a game that people can just sort of rock into, and it's not. I don't think it's sort of super deep on the gameplay side of things. So just sort of being a sort of character running around in the 3D world shooting things. It's all everyone knows roughly how to do that. Everyone plays Fortnite, and it's a very sort of. So in some ways, doesn't sort of stand out from a graphical point of view. But the signature character stuff is actually quite good. They have a really good, quite famous sort of lead creative designer on the characters. So I think the characters actually do quite stand out. So obviously they're sort of, that's sort of a Korean design, sort of almost like sort of small heads and big baggy trousers. It's almost like the sort of design. I quite like the characters, and obviously there's a whole bunch of customization around that as well. So I think they sort of, I wouldn't say they're a AAA game, but they sort of know what they're doing. And I think they are accessible in terms of the gameplay side of things. So it'll be interesting to see when it goes into early access tomorrow, what people make of it. Obviously, there's, when you play these sort of movement games, there's a fundamental thing is the sort of movement combat side of it. Does that sort of fit into what people expect? And I guess sort of Fortnite and Call of Duty on the more sort of military side are sort of like the templates that people do. So is it sort of jarring from just that actually just being in the world, moving around, jumping around, shooting things? And then there's obviously the other side, which is all the sort of more complicated sort of game progression, and obviously the blockchain stuff. I don't think will be in there at this point. So we'll see, but we'll get a sort of first taste about whether people do like it. They've done quite well on the marketing side. So I think I don't quite know what it means, but they quote they were the third most wish listed game on Epic Game Store. Obviously that sort of depends on, that's a time frame thing. That's not a all time thing. So it seems like they have sort of quite a lot of demand built up. And as I say, that they are a big thing for the Sui blockchain, which it doesn't have a lot going on for it at the moment. I think there's sort of some quite interesting things they're doing there, building there in general, not just in gaming, but this is quite a big deal for them. So we'll see. And 1.6 million again is not an absolute ton of money. I think they've raised now about over 8 million. So they're not like it's not massive funding. They're in South Korea, so it's not the most expensive place in the world, but they are a fairly large team, so they're not the cheapest team in the world either. And most of the team are, spending their time just building a game stuff. They're not on the blockchain side of things. So they do have sort of quite a heavy sort of cost from just operating that sort of game. So they do need to, they can't be a scrappy little, sort of cockroach team. They do have to have that sort of funding. So we'll see. It's not a ton of funding, but it'll probably give them some marketing, and we'll actually see now, because they have been out for they've been in various playtests and stuff for a couple of years. So there's not like, so this is the right time for them to do that, and then we'll sort of see how they can sort of progress on. I guess they can't do what a lot of people are doing is, well, maybe they can and put a Web 2 version on Steam. They've not mentioned that at all. I mean, I think they've always been a Web 3 game, partly because they were sort of incubated in Hashed, which is a Web 3 investor. So they certainly could strip it all out and just do a Web 2 game. But hopefully they will have a product that people can just get into as a game. And the Web 3 stuff is an accelerant rather than a sort of a negative aspect of it. But we'll wait and see.
Yeah, they have the token that they tried to sort of build up a bit of hype around, and sort of quite one of the early ones to sort of start talking about it as an ecosystem token, and it would sort of how it would encourage the kind of the community and engagement in the wider sort of society community.
It does actually make me they did it. So it just remind me, I sort of totally forgot actually, they do actually have a token. Yeah. So they launched NFTs. There's not actually very many of them. There's less than 5,000 NFTs. They did that on Ethereum, and they're still on Ethereum. There's obviously a migration thing going, I suppose, at some point to Sui. And they, I don't think they've been flawless at all on the Web3 side of things. So they had these characters. And they were, in a sense, they've been good. They've not gone up massively in price and then come crashing down again. They're sort of, I think on the last time I looked, about $150 floor price, which is not ridiculous, but obviously quite expensive for a game character. They have launched this token. So the token is called Exo. Just looking at it, and I don't know if I missed it, but it did go live. I assume it's on Sui. Went live in June actually this year. So it's actually sort of roughly at the price it sort of was. So it's actually not gone up and down very much at all, which is quite surprising for token these days. I don't think there's much of it floating around. So there's what are they saying here? So it's like less than 10% circulating supply of total supply. And obviously there's no functionality for it at the moment. And I do think sort of being on a, one of the reasons to pick a blockchain like Sui is that, it's not like tons of people are massively into Sui like they might be into, like, I don't know, weird people into Hedera still, or Ripple or something like that. There's not got a massive, it's not got a massive hardcore base that are like speculating on it, but there is an audience there that may sort of get involved. So having a token on that sort of blockchain, it means there's not a ton, even though it's sort of live on exchanges. There's not a ton of speculation on it. So it is on some exchanges, Bybit, South Korean one, isn't it, Mex? So there is some speculation in there, but it's not, they've managed to sort of, I guess because sentiment's not been good, it's not gone massively down. There's not a ton of it out there, and no one's been buying in to sort of raise it up and drop it again. So that's worked out sort of okay for them. Obviously, in the long term, can you build utility into that sort of token? That will be sort of a function of, can they get enough players into the game, which is always the sort of big issue. Mm-hmm. Because I've actually also got the what's it called, the Sui Play X0X1 little handheld thing, which I've not sure about actually, but it does have the Epic Game Store on there, so they're saying that will support obviously the game, and obviously they will probably spend a bit of time making sure the game works well on that hardware in particular. So that'll be a interesting sort of use of that hardware to actually sort of play the game and sort of see how that sort of works as well. So that'll be my homework for the weekend if I can see that to work. But obviously just download it from the Epic Game Store on a PC as well. So that'll be the easy way to do it.
Good. Right. So Cross the Ages, the French developer, known for sort of his initial the game trading card game Across the Ages.
Yep.
It now launched its second game, Arise, an RPG, into open alpha on Epic Games Store. So I don't know if we've covered much of Across the Ages before. I don't think we've spoken much about them.
No.
They were fairly successful, I think, with the trading card game initially. It's quite a deep. I did give it a go, but it's too strategic for me. I can't get into the. It's too deep, basically. But Arise is a different kind of game. So talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's no, I don't think we've mentioned them sort of that much. So Across the Ages was sort of, I wouldn't say it's like it was sort of one of those games that, you know, if a game came out at a certain period of time, so they came out in 2022, or they did their first asset sales in 2022, so you could sort of be successful just by a dint of the timing it into the Axie boom sort of thing. So I think if you look at a lot of those games can sort of say, oh, we sold like, $20 million worth of NFTs, but that was literally for like a, there's a 2-month period, and then they haven't sold anything since then. So I think they do quote that they've sold 40 million NFTs, which are these cards. And one interesting thing about Across the Ages, the trading card game, is it sounds stereotypical or xenophobic to say they're very French, but they're very French. So the game, as you say, was overly complicated as a trading card game. We both tried to play it at the same time, and there's a complicated. I mean, I think, if you really want to get into it, it's not like so complicated. It's particle physics, but it's, you have to sort of place your cards in a very strategic way that they sort of synergize all together, and sort of, there was something there. But as I always say for trading card games, the problem is most people like the idea, like the trading card games, but trading card games have to be super deep to sort of work. If it's like Splinterlands, everyone goes to Splinterlands. Oh, it's just too simple. So that's the problem with trading card games is getting that balance right between allowing noobs like us to really get into them and go, oh yeah, I really like this. And then if you're spending time playing it, then you learn it. But if it's just the basic thing of putting it together is so complicated, then you just never get the activation. You never have the activation energy to get into the game. And so they sort of rode that wave well. They've raised tons of money. I mean, relative, like 35 million or something. Animoca is a really strong backer for them. And the lead CEO, he's one of these sort of very charismatic guys, and he's very into art. So one of the big things they had was all these different art packs, which is why they released so many NFTs, because they had all these, they were getting artists, and it was all, transmedia, and we're not building a game, we're building a universe and narrative and lore and blah blah blah, all this sort of, and that sort of stuff's easy to do in the boom years when everyone is looking for high concept stuff. And Across the Ages was very, very high context stuff, but clearly the mobile game itself didn't scale, and probably the Web3 side of it at a certain point didn't help it in that. So the trading card game is probably still playable, but I don't think there's anything going on there apart from the hardcore people who really go for it. But this Arise game is sort of a weird second phase of that. So I don't think it's like the original game sort of flopped and then they said, oh, what can we do? I think this is part of the plan, the slightly mad plan that they had and to raise all this money for, to make a third person combat multiplayer RPG. So Arise is basically a dungeon-based RPG. It's a multiplayer in the sense that you could play through a dungeon on your own, but the dungeons are designed to be pretty hard. So you probably need these up to 4 players, and it's different character classes, and it's very focused on crafting gear. So you basically want to have a really good squad of different types of class and different gear systems, so you can beat the best dungeons. And you go through the dungeons like all these sort of games to get resources, and then you have your plot, your base, your land, and then you're building buildings to refine these resources and build different items. And there's a whole crafting system which is around gear, as I mentioned. There's also, they're talking about like a big trading system, so you probably won't be able to collect the stuff you need, so you'll be trading it, getting it from the dungeons and trading it. So that sort of all makes sense from a sort of game design point of view, and it's sort of in the same universe that they've sort of started to create already. Now, I guess the sort of wider question is, stripping out all the sort of narrative and this is the lore and Across the Ages and blah, it's just, does the world need another sort of 3D dungeon crawling game. And Web3 has a lot of sort of dungeon crawling games because that sort of mechanic is people sort of like it. Sort of going into a hard dungeon, maybe getting killed.
But
getting
when you say
some...
that about any game that comes in Web3, you go, does the world need another
No, well, yeah, but that sort of is.
MMORPG.
well, yeah. I mean, it's a good point, good argument. But either you do something really quite wacky, using the blockchain, or if you're just doing sort of, I wouldn't say cookie cutter, but a sort of game design everyone knows is there's probably already a game in that genre that's doing super well. So, are you going to get those players from that other genre? The main thing I was going to actually say about the problem with these sort of dungeon crawling games, I mean, they're not as expensive as open world RPGs, which are hundreds of millions of dollars to make, but they still are quite expensive because you're making all these 3D areas, and obviously you can sort of reuse them, but it's sort of heavy in sort of art costs, and they're harder to test, and again you have the whole thing. If you're doing a shooter game, then sort of the movement shooting aspect is sort of the foundation of how the whole game. If you don't get that right, you're not going to get the game right. But in sort of RPGs, they can actually sort of be, if they're not careful, that the movement part is not so important because it's not a Twitch game in that same way. So often they can actually be quite clunky when you just the basic move, just the basic thing you do in the game, moving your character around, can actually be quite clunky in RPGs because that's not their key focus. Their key focus is the progression. So often they can be quite off-putting if they don't spend enough time on that. And these guys, I don't know anything about their dev or anything like that, but this is the first time they've made this sort of game. It's not. I don't think it's the easiest thing to actually get right. If I was, say, with Xociety, I think that's an easier game to get right, and I think they probably will do a better job on just that game side of it. I think with the RPGs, it's a slightly smaller audience, and it's just you have to spend a lot more money, I think, just to sort of get table stakes of that sort of thing. So we'll see. They said it's open alpha, so it's very early. The thing I find really sort of, I've sort of said these mad French people, and maybe not gone into why they're really mad in French. The weirdest thing about it, it's not French, but the weirdest thing about it, and I don't know if they're still doing it, but it's still in their white paper, although the white paper's not been updated for a year. So I imagine I can't believe they're still doing it. They were trying to get funding for this other part of a wider bit of sort of companion sort of piece to Arise, which was called Reverse.
Oh yeah.
And in Reverse is you take the land in Arise, so your base is going to be sort of mapped into a real world piece of land. So, an actual bit of land somewhere. Okay. I mean, that's sort of interesting. And they're going to have this whole meta game around people, in the game sort of, raiding people's land for resources. So it's all resource based. But then in the real world, they were going to have this land, and they were going to somehow, never got to the bottom of it, this land was going to have green energy associated with it. So like hydropower or solar power or something like that. And then, because it's got this power attached to it, they were going to try and sell it to crypto miners and data center companies and stuff. So you'd have this land somewhere where they'd have to, I don't know how they get the green energy into the land. And then they were going to be trying to sell it off to, I mean, these days, obviously AI companies. And it just I love a high concept. No problem with a high concept, and if you're going to, go, some investors would love that, the green energy and the, it was really, this was a few years ago when I first read about it. That's really on the money. That's really where a lot of stuff has been happening. But to try and do that as well as making a game, it's sort of like juggling like an elephant and a crocodile. I mean, it's just if it worked, absolutely amazing. But the chance of it working is so tiny. You got to find the land, you got to find the electricity, then you got to find data companies who are gonna. Where is your land going to be, in Colombia or in? I don't know. So I just get the impression that maybe as you get old and maybe it's a bit more cynical, just do one thing well. Just if you do one thing well, you can then do a second thing and build it out. Don't try and do 3 totally orthogonal things brilliantly. It's anyway, to say, I don't know if they're not mentioned this in the press release for Arise, so this is maybe me just beating them with an old stick. But I think it just goes to a little bit to the it's great they're passionate and ambitious, but sort of choose your battles, I guess, is the thing. I mean, let's say the one thing they have really strong backing from Animoca. I mean, Animoca said they're going to be, they've been buying the CTA token off the market. I don't know how much they spent. They didn't say. It hasn't really had any impact on the price. The price is lower than when it was when Animoca said they were going to start buying the tokens in June. I'm not a massive. I mean, I think token buybacks can be great, but it needs to be really well structured. And if you've got a token that's very liquid on exchanges, then basically you're just providing extra liquidity for your holders, which may not be the most sensible use of funding, really. But anyway, we will see in open alpha on the Epic Game Store now.
Good. You talk about token buybacks there, and now
yes, it was good. It's almost like we planned it.
Yeah. Right. So Nexpace has announced this week, following on from last week's announcement of a 15 million ecosystem fund, 50 million, not 15, that it is it's going to burn 1.7 million worth of NXPC tokens to kind of limit the circulating supply. So I'll hand it over to you when it comes to numbers in more detail.
Yeah.
How much is 1.7 million in terms of NXPC tokens, and how big a percentage is that? Do you know of the?
Yes. So yeah, me talking about buying tokens. So this is slightly different. I actually got this wrong when I first wrote it up. It was a bit embarrassing. So Maple Story Universe, the big ecosystem around currently the Maple Story N PC MMORPG from Nexpace, who is the Web3 arm of Nexon, the big South Korean publisher. So their thing we've spoken about a lot this year. The game came out in the 15th of May. I wouldn't say it's been as I say, not a blown out success, but I think they've done a really credible job. They get about 60,000 daily active unique wallets. Obviously, some of them are bots. They spend a lot of time getting rid of bots. I think they've built something sort of solid, and in a sort of sector where we have a lot of boom bust. I think Maple Story, is. It's a sort of a solid growth story, which is nice. I mean, as I say, sort of Nexon gave them $100 million of funding for the project, so that's they know they've got years of funding, and they announced last week an up to $50 million ecosystem fund, which is basically designed to encourage third-party developers to build around their system. And as we've mentioned many times, it's not a fully on-chain game, I don't think, but they're trying to build an ecosystem and allow people to have access to SDKs and APIs. APIs, yeah. To get access to sort of the data and build, start off with little utilities and then build mini games around these things. And this is this sort of interoperability thing is one of the key things about blockchain and having sort of open source. And we haven't saw a lot of it in the early days and not much of it recently. EVE Online are trying to do the same thing, or EVE Frontier, CCP games. And it's nice we're seeing that coming back in. I think that is a key thing. It takes a long time to build these ecosystems properly strong, but you have to do the hard work. So good to see. So burning tokens, as I say, I don't think it actually has a lot of impact in most cases. Obviously, what it's doing is it's reducing the supply. So in most projects, we have a certain total supply of tokens. Normally, that's around 1 billion, or can be more than that. Can be any number you want, but people go for 1 billion. And at any point, you have a percentage of that is circulating. So that's the tokens that are actually released. And normally, you have a 5-year vesting period where all the tokens are given out to the team. I mean, it depends how you structure it, but often the team gets some, the investors obviously get some. There's some for ecosystem funds. There's some for giveaway for rewards, or however you want. Some go to liquidity pools and stuff like that. So you can structure it however you want to. But the only big token that's fully liquid at the moment is IMX, Immutables token. So that was about a month ago. All those tokens are out now. So if they started burning tokens, then they'd actually be sort of actively reducing the total supply. If you reduce the supply by 1%, it's obviously not doing very much. If you reduce it by 50%, that's quite a lot. So you have to sort of try and get, there's the idea, the concept of burning tokens, which you get rid of tokens. But if you're only burning, 100 tokens out of 1 billion, then it doesn't have any impact at all. So that's what you try and get a handle on. In the case of Maple Story and the NXPC token, they have 1 billion tokens in total, and they have about 23% currently circulating. So over the next few years, all those other tokens of basically 75% of the tokens are still to be released. So burning tokens now is not going to really have much actual impact in terms of if you're looking for the price to do anything with the price. and the price is still going down. So it's sort of a bit performative, I would say. But what they've said is it's structured a bit like Binance do this burn of the BNB tokens every quarter, and so for MapleStory every quarter now ongoing, they're going to be burning 20% of the sort of the revenue they've gained from people trading in the marketplace and people spending the token in the game.
Yeah.
So they're not putting any new money in. I think that can have an impact if you're sort of putting if you're saying we're taking 10% of our non-crypto revenue and using that to buy back the tokens, which sort of some people do. Hytopia using 15% of people buying in sort of fiat and buying back their token. That can have an impact, particularly over time. They're not doing that in this case. They're just taking 20% of the tokens they get, which they can't sell because the price is at very low anyway, and they're just burning those. So over time, that will add up. I think even now they're burning. I think this 1.7 million tokens is about 1%, over 1% of the circulating supply. So it's not nothing. But even if you take it over a year period, and you're burning maybe 5, 6, 7% of the circulating supply, not the total supply. So so it's good to see. It's a good thing to set up. People I think people like to see companies setting these things up, but unless you're actually having quite a heavy impact, it doesn't make much odds. I mean, we saw a sort of similar thing with, I think, the Ron Treasury spent about $5 million selling ETH and buying RON, and it just had no impact at all. That token's so liquid and so much down pressure on it. They've been better off keeping that money and staking it or something. So sometimes these things are performative, and in a situation where speculation is still driving the token price, that can have an impact. But the speculations, the sort of narrative is so down at the moment that there's hardly anything you can do to drive speculative, animal spirits back into the market. So timing is a big issue as well. But I think it's good to see. It's sort of like it shows a well thought out long term view of ecosystem, I think, but it won't have any impact this year or probably next year, I don't think.
No, that's a good kind of explanation of burnbacks and burning and buybacks. Right, next to my notes, Hytopia. I'm not sure what we were going to discuss about that. I had seen 1 million downloads on Google Play Store, I think, announced this week.
Yeah.
But it's not only mobile, is it? It's also available for. So it will be more than 1 million, but that was the kind of headline news this week, wasn't it? You had Hytopia on the podcast, didn't you?
Yeah. It's just because we had the podcast last week, so I mentioned them, and so they're sort of like I call them now sort of a sort of Roblox with blockchain. So they're a UGC platform that has blockchain payment methods in there as well, and they just sort of their token went live last week. So it's like a million downloads on Play is actually not too bad. But you say they're available on Apple Play. So it's a web. You can play it through a browser. You can download it as a desktop app. I mean, it's all the same. It's all the same app. It's just a progressive web app. Yeah, and I think again it will be a long-term thing for them. I don't think competing with Roblox is sort of impossible. You don't compete directly with Roblox. But I mean, they're actually doing some research into Roblox this week. I fell down a bit of a rabbit hole about their economic system, and it is interesting that they have tons and tons of users, but they have a massive take. They take like 70% of the payments, even though they're sort of trying to drop it. And clearly over time, no one can as Jeff Bezos used to say, your margin is my opportunity, which is basically if you have a very high margin business, people are just going to come in and over time force you to reduce your margin. In the case of Roblox, I mean, it's sort of they sort of a bit of our monopoly because everyone plays and they have the social graph around it. But over time, there's you can't just sort of take 70% of the revenue. So I'm spending thinking about that sort of stuff, and Hytopia is one that I will be keeping an eye on. So maybe we'll have a few short mini news stories about Hytopia hopefully in the coming episodes.
Yeah, good. Finally, this week's podcast was with JC Kim from formerly Planetarium. It's still on Planetarium, isn't he? But he's also recently come on as co-CEO for D Labs Games.
Yeah.
So two South Korean developers. So what did you talk about? He's got this new Verse 8 AI kind of platform, which is a collab, isn't it, between Planetarium and D Labs Games, actually, isn't it?
No, it's not actually. But just point out another South Korean. So it's interesting that of the companies we're talking about, over half of them are South Korean. And South Koreans, it has, it really. I sort of made fun of them in sort of earlier episodes because a lot of them sort of didn't know what they're doing. But it's interesting that South Korea is a hyper crypto focus. There's a lot of actually interesting stuff going on there outside of gaming and crypto. So they really seem to sort of get it as a sort of sector and industry. But anyway, yes. So this is actually a podcast I actually did. I think it was in August. It was August. I think it's sort of for various reasons, sort of kept getting put back. So some of the information is a tiny bit dated in there. But as you say, so JC Kim had him on the podcast originally last year talking about Nine Chronicles, the game that Planetarium put out and are still operating. But he'd also at the time been working on this genAI platform. I think it was originally like a game engine. It was like a thing they were trying to build, and then they sort of got into genAI, and it sort of became something slightly different. But you can check it out. It's at verse8.io. That's sort of the consumer sort of element of it, and in that you can just use as you would type in something you want to make, and it will sort of make it. It's very simple, sort of hyper casual games. The main focus actually there, I think, is you can take other people's games and sort of remix them. I think they call them respin them or spin them. So if you see a game that you like, you can sort of go, "I'll make the main character, SpongeBob SquarePants or something," and obviously, yes, genAI does that really well. So they're not trying to build a sort of social platform around that, but that's sort of what they do, trying to get people to use the platform and remix stuff, and you can vote on stuff, and a sort of curated sort of situation. But the main focus they have is for professional developers, and as you say, JC Kim is the CEO still of Planetarium, but also now is the co-CEO of this other game studio called D Labs, which is sort of more experienced. And we've spoken to them over the past. They've gone through sort of various pivots and cycles, and they're trying to find what they want to do. And they now say they're an AI first game development studio. So lots of game studios, say we're not using AI, it's dreadful, and all their fans are like looking through. I saw it again today, looking through just every bit of artwork, and I think that's been used by AI, and it's just the whole thing is just like it is literally a witch hunt, absolute witch hunt, which is hilarious because basically when it comes to coding, there's no games company in the world that's not using AI for coding. I mean, literally there is not, because it's like 90% faster, but how can no one can go through your computer code and go, you use AI for the computer code, but everyone's using it. But it's for artwork. They're all like looking through these tiny little things. And it's absolute, I never thought of it, but it literally is a witch hunt where people are absolutely trying to find any sort of progressive ill, using,
let's talk about verse 8.
Anyway, talk about verses. Sorry, it's one down a rabbit hole. It really annoys me. So anyway, so with verses, actually, what they're looking for is to help professional developers, and the platform is actually quite deep. So it's a multiplayer 3D platform. You can make 2D assets and 3D assets and some audio stuff as well. They have I'm not quite sure what's live yet because it's different to the prosumer stuff, the consumer stuff you can see. But they've spoken about having AI agents in there as well as part of the sort of game. So you can basically, that part of it is nothing to do with blockchain. That's just like an AI, a generative AI game making tool. And JC Kim says it basically reduces your cost by 90%. It means an artist doesn't have to have a coder working with them to create something, or a coder doesn't need an artist, and they can all collaborate around these things. And he just says, at D Labs, you can just go much faster, and particularly that obviously drives the cost down, but it's more about iteration. So you're making things really fast, you're sticking them out to the community, you're finding what works, what doesn't work, you're killing stuff. I mean, all that, this is something that game studios have been talking about for the last decade of, iterating fast, killing games that don't work. Now you can do it, 10 times faster than you did before. Will the quality be as good? No. And I think that's one of the interesting sort of criticisms, I guess, of, AI slop or whatever. And to a degree, that's part of, AI systems not being perfect, they'll never be perfect, but it's sort of, Tyler Cow in The Economist says a lot of people's view of generative AI is based on the first time they used ChatGPT, like maybe 3 years ago, ChatGPT 3 or 4. I've just moved over to ChatGPT, the Pro, the $200 a month thing, and I'm not doing art assets and stuff, but it's so much better than even the $20 a month one. I mean, unless you're using the real cutting edge stuff all the time, you have people's perceptions can be really sort of I think wrong about this sort of stuff in their heads. And, anyone who's looked at this stuff seriously is just very serious about how impactful AI will be. So obviously they're trying to get ahead of the game on that. The first games that have used AI from D Labs will come out next year. As I say, you're not going to get the fidelity is not going to be as good, but that's to degree that's sort of the point, and that's what we see with every technology is the fidelity sort of goes down over time. And it comes when MP3s came in, the fidelity of the audio stream was reduced from what it was before. Anyway, onto one of my hobby horses. So I just kind of think that's sort of part and parcel of what a new technology comes in, and it unlocks new ways to do things. And as a sort of secondary part of that, in the early stages at least, some fidelity is reduced. And some people can throw out their arms and obviously not get involved. That's perfectly fine and up to them. But the sort of the inexorable march of this sort of stuff is going to happen. So we'll see what happens with D Labs. I would say check out Verse 8. Verse8.io is this website. You can go and check that out. I think they do give you a certain number of free credits at the moment. So obviously it is a credit-based system. You are using sort of generative AI, which costs money. So I think you get $20 of free credits to begin with to sort of mess around with stuff. And obviously remixing something is cheaper than creating your own thing. But as you sort of probably gathered, I just think this generative AI stuff, the more and more you look at it, and I'll be looking at it for as a very cat-handed amateur for a number of years, it's just absolutely staggering. And people who, it's fine for people to not adopt it in their own working practices, but in the games industry, the small c conservative nature of maybe a small minority of people, but it is interesting that they think computer games should be like a craft system, like maybe there's still people who make shoes by hand. There's people who make there's a man in the Isle of Man famously makes watches, and every single component of a watch he makes by hand, all the screws, everything. Those watches cost £1 million. They're amazing, but we're not. That's not the watches we're buying. We're buying $20 swatches or what.
Okay.
It's interesting that games have ended up as like almost like a heritage sort of this is a handmade game. That's sort of great, but that's not really ever been the point of games in my experience. And I just kind of think some of the AI stuff that comes out is going to be fascinating. And yeah,
good.
Rant over.
Rant over. Excellent.
I ranted so much you had to leave the computer.
Yeah.
You heard it all before.
No, good. Thank you very much, John. Lots of good explanatory stuff in there. Right. Thank you. We'll see you all next week. Bye-bye.
Next week. Bye-bye.